Hey, if you'd like to earn CEUs for this webinar, join the Safeopedia community at the link in the description below. Now, on to the show.
Scott, thank you so much. Greetings everyone, first of all. I unfortunately I can't see the chat on the platform. So I'm sure there's lots of great chat going on, and my apologies because I can't see it. But the first thing I would ask, do we have any Trekkies out there? The whole concept of being more visionary, and I think many of you out there are, is really kind of looking futuristically. What's coming down the line? What is it that I need to know about as a safety, health, environmental professional? And that's what we're going to talk about today. So my experience is across industry sector, and I've really been involved more at the strategy level with companies. I'm kind of known as the global gal, and now with Malk Staves, who hopefully you all got to see this morning, talking about some very practical application on what L'Oreal is doing. And Malk and I are co-chairs of the it's the project group for the Capitals Coalition. And what we're doing is we're looking to tie people and people's sustainability and occupational health and safety. And that's what we've been doing globally together as co-chairs of that group. And what I want to do today is to share with you really kind of about value and thinking about people sustainability, and connecting some dots. That's the other thing that I'm really known for, is connecting the dots. And today we're going to talk about safety, health, ESG, and sustainability. So let's go. So a lot of what you're going to hear today is in a book that I'm co-authoring with my colleague, Tanis Marquette. And Tanis is a former Chief Sustainability Officer. And she and I have put our heads together and tried to put together a practical application, day-to-day, what you really need to know. And that, unfortunately, I don't have enough time today, but we're going to kind of hit some highlights. And hopefully the published date is going to be, well, this says December, but it'll probably be first quarter 2025. So when I go through these things, there's a lot of research, a lot of interviews that were done to really learn and understand frameworks and best practice in the world of sustainability and this integration and interconnectivity with occupational health and safety. And at the end of the day, many of us have the hats of environmental health and safety, so EH&S as well. So today I want to really focus on big picture and really understanding the business environment in which we're operating. And that's really where we're going to stay today and help you. And if you did see the session with Malk, one of his, I think his seventh tidbit that he tips that he shared was about really understanding the language of business. And I've been doing this for a long time, and this will help you talk to operational leaders and the CEOs and the C-suites in your organizations. So what we want to do today is really focus on leveraging sustainability and ESG to elevate workplace health and safety, because that's why we're here. So let's start connecting some dots. And let's begin with this whole concept of value, right? Companies live and breathe by the value that they create for their customers, depending if they're publicly traded, for their investment community, for their supply chain, for their workers, for the communities, and the economies within those communities and beyond. So when we think of value, there's intrinsic value. And intrinsic value, we all understand this. We think about people and we think about the value of their life. There's intrinsic value. It is just there. You don't even have to measure it. Then in the world, when we think of value, we think of financial value. So in the world of occupational health and safety, it might be capital expenditures, right? It could be workers' compensation. It could be lost wages, medical expenses. It could be lost productivity, if you will, in an organization. And then there's that non-financial, which is traditionally not found on a balance sheet or in profit and loss statement for any kind of company, no matter what size it is. And you could be a small enterprise and you're going to have a profit and loss statement. Your QuickBooks will help you with that if you're a very small company. Two, scaling up to a large multinational company. And typically those non-financials are us. It's the safety and health of people. We don't measure it and put it on the bottom line with the exception of insurance premiums, right? Or experience modifications, which is throughout Canada, it's in the United States, but it's also throughout the world through employers' liability. And the idea of natural resources, we don't necessarily, the environmental side, we tend to look at that as a non-financial with the exception of the fines, if you will, for non-compliance with regulations. So what I want to do today is kind of change this script. I want to start to change this conversation around value, change the math around value, and think about what the end goal is, which is to influence decisions from anyone in the organization at any level, from the frontline person on that construction site, building out the scaffolding or building out the concrete fixtures to the CEO, the boards of directors. They're all decision makers at their own levels, and that's what we want to influence on a daily basis. So if we think about organizations and companies, some companies are large enough that their revenues are literally the GDP of a smaller or medium-sized country. So there's a lot of opportunity for business to create a better world. And what happens is in the mix, in the middle here, is the financial reward system, commonly known as capitalism. And that means everything tends to go to the financial impacts that anything has to do. So labor shortages, price of raw materials, supply chain shortages, investors and your market capitalization, your share price, all of those things come into play. The cost of benefits, everything tends to get measured in that profit and loss statement. And those are the guardrails, if you will, within the context of capitalism. And so what we're doing today is we're going to look at value that is created for all stakeholders, including the company itself. And how do we expand what that reward system, that financial reward system looks like? So let's talk about changing that conversation. And if we think about workers, they're people, right? Workers are at the core of every thriving business. And if you will, intrinsically, their ability to contribute to a company is influenced by their health, by their safety, and their well-being. And so if we think about this is innovation, right? It's that discretionary energy Paul O'Neill, when he was CEO of Alcoa, talked about, is that people will give that extra if they trust the company, if they believe in the purpose of the company, and they have a sense of well-being and quote unquote love their work, they will give that extra bit. And that is contribution. And that's what we're going to talk about today. What is the contribution of workers? And implicitly, if a worker is not has an injury or an ill health, they can't contribute. So we are foundational to this whole notion of value. So when we think of value, 2.93 million people lose their lives every year due to a work-related accident or illness. And I think, Jamie, you were on earlier this morning with Malk and talked about, I think you did the official countdown of 10 seconds and noted how many people die within that 10 seconds. So it's really real. It's extremely relevant that we talk about people either being injured or fatalities occurring of death, and how that impacts the people, their families, their communities, as well as the organization. And what kind of financial impacts does that have on families, on communities? And that's the value that we want to talk about. And how do we look at that? And I say monetizing, but look at that from a financial perspective, not the value of life. That's not what we're talking about. But we're talking about the value of the contribution that person brings or can't bring because they're injured or they're no longer alive. So let's talk about accounting for value. And your accounting departments know all about this. They know all about your profit and loss statements, that balance sheet. But we want to really focus on the impact of workers and their health, safety, and well-being today. So let's talk about some of the influences. So Scott, if you can help me out, I'd love to get a sense of what is the fluency on sustainability and ESG in our group today. So Scott's going to launch this poll, and I want you to be thinking about, your fluency. How much do you know? How much do you want to know? Hopefully you're here today, so you'll have a better, I have a better sense that at least there's some interest. So
yeah, and yeah, people are answering. So if you navigate on the right-hand side to polls there, you'll be able to answer those questions.
all right. Because this gives us all kind of a sense of where we are. And I'll be really honest with you, when I first started doing this, I've been involved in this whole people side of sustainability, i.e. you can't be a top 100 most sustainable company and have 43 fatalities in a year. And honestly, that's what was happening in the top 100 companies with corporate nights. And we had this conversation as chair of the Center for Safety and Health Sustainability with Tony Heaps, who is the CEO, the editor-in-chief of Corporate Knights, Canadian-based organization. And once he learned that, that became one of the criteria for the measurement of fatalities for being one of the top 100 companies. So this is really important, and safety and health is integral. Scott, you want to give us some numbers?
Oh yeah, I guess I was doing a spoiler and displayed the survey results as they were coming in, but we've got 23% new to ESG, 29% have heard of environmental side of sustainability, and 41% saying number, or C rather, I have knowledge of all dimensions of ESG and sustainability, and 6% I am in charge of the ESG sustainability in my organization, and only 1% at number 5 I should be presenting this session.
Lovely. I wish that you could come present with me, but hopefully in the Q&A you'll give us some good feedback and some other thoughts for you to share. I think that's really important. So thank you, Scott, and thank you, everybody. So we have a real mix today. So what I want to do is just kind of give just a really brief framework. I had a short period of time with you. So this whole construct of sustainable development, sustainability, it's been around for a very long time. The United Nations, through the Brundtland Commission back in 1987, really kind of brought this forward, this integration of business and development with sustainability to really talk about what does it mean to be sustainable over time and developing a sustainable way. And so this is a model that meets the needs of the present, so the present time, without compromising the ability of our future generations to meet their own needs. And that is very broad, because right now everybody thinks sustainability is just the environment. And so it's really important that we understand there's a holistic approach that considers the social, environmental, as well as economic impacts. I'm going to unpack that in just a minute, of the actions and the decisions that organizations make. Now, they can be publicly traded, non-publicly traded private companies. They could be non-government organizations. It doesn't matter, just organizations. So this is important. And this was very high levels. The Prime Minister of Norway was Gro Brundtland. And she actually was the first chair of the World Commission on Sustainable Development. This started everything. So let's talk about what this concept of sustainability is today. And I am here to tell you that it's evolving. So this is looking at impacts. So whether they're financial or non-financial, i.e. non-financial, meaning the social side, meaning health, safety, people at work, communities, social relationships, and what those impacts are relative to this company. So environmental stewardship, social responsibility, economic contribution. So for me, this is really important to be thinking of. This is the company's focus. Sustainability is their strategies. It's what their actions. It's what the company does and the decisions they take on a daily basis. And I really want to point out that this includes profitability, because if a company is not contributing economically to the economy, to communities, and innovating new products and services, that is part of sustainability. And many don't really think about that. And again, the focus seems to be on environment, but we're going to unpack that a little bit too. So when we think of the social side, this is a side that is really starting to move forward. It's slow, but it's starting. And this is where we are. It's the people side of sustainability, or people sustainability, as I like to call it. And this includes workers, right? This includes employees or talent or teammates, associates. This is the human capital of an organization, the people side. And health, safety, and well-being is integrated into the people side of sustainability. So we're looking at impacts that an organization has on people, communities, on their customers, because these are the relationships, right? On their suppliers, on society as a whole, the economy, and any other relationships based on their actual industry sector. So this is the social. So we talked about environment, social, and then governance, and economic side of sustainability. And the one thing I want to just put in the mix here, because this is really important when we're thinking about value, is what is the impact a company has externally, or they call externalities, investors like to call them. And this is the company's impacts on workers. So thinking about injuries and ill health, thinking about customer and consumer trust, thinking about volunteering, looking at inequity or inequality. And this is environmental justice, as well as equity relative to people at work and relative to people in communities. It's worker rights, it's women's empowerment, and it's about internships, right? Apprenticeships, about training and development. And that's the company's impact externally. A dependency is what most companies don't think about. And what is a company dependent on? And this is what investors look at. They're looking at, and customers as well, because they need resilience and business continuity. So this rule of law, right? Very important for an organization, depending on where they are in the world, to actually be fit and actually turn a profit. But also worker health. We saw that in the pandemic, labor shortages, et cetera. A talent pipeline. So there are opportunities for a skilled workforce. So this idea of dependency also includes natural resources. So if your company uses water, your company uses forests, so wood, any kind of biodiverse chemicals, natural resources, all of those things need to be replenished. Otherwise, thinking about lithium in batteries, otherwise the organization cannot produce its products and provides the services that are needed. So impacts and dependencies, extremely important to be thinking about, both when we're thinking about value, we're thinking about business continuity, when we're thinking about trust, as well as resilience of an organization in the event of some sort of incident that happens. So what I want to do is, I don't have time to go through in depth, but this is unpacking sustainability. So this whole environmental side right now, focus on greenhouse gas emissions, a company's carbon footprint, looking at water use, chemicals management. Right now, another huge focus is on biodiversity and ecology management. So what is an organization doing as it uses any kind of biodiversity, chemicals, minerals, anything of that sort? How are they replenishing that, or how are they using that in a sustainable way? And then deforestation and waste. And waste includes packaging. So a lot right now, the focus really is on environmental. But if we look at the social side includes an intersection of health and safety with environmental impacts, as well as impacts internally from a health and safety perspective. Crisis management, looking at risk analysis relative to climate and climate risk, thinking about human rights and human rights assessments, community engagement, and workforce development. This is where human capital, or people working in companies and the value that those people bring, their contribution to the company, comes into play. And then the economic side, and this really brings in governance, and governance is just basically a company, what they say they're doing is having systems in place like audits, like a role clarity, looking at any kinds of roles and responsibilities and designations throughout the organization, so job descriptions and things of that nature, and internal as well as external auditing. And all of those things are part of the governance of an organization, how it actually operates and what kind of systems and policies and procedures does it have in place. So when we think about down here, the socioeconomic side, the people side, which is our world, right? We're looking at employment, we're looking at living wage, we're looking at development, right? Any kind of promotion, that sort of thing. Internships, sponsorships, and volunteering. And then on the environment and economic side, again, operational efficiencies, looking at resiliency, looking at a responsible supply chain and accountability for the supply chain. So all these things are evolving, but this is the core of sustainability for a company. And if we really kind of boil it all, if we boil it all down, we're looking at an integrated approach, and this is decision making, and this is the sweet spot for all stakeholders. So environmental stewardship, social responsibility, and economic contribution. If you don't learn or don't walk away with anything else today, the 23 and 29% of you all, and the ones and twos, this is extremely important, and this is sustainability. So I want to just flip this for just a minute or two on environmental, social, and governance. And if I could see the chat, I would ask how many of you all are actually involved in ESG. But I can't see you, so I'm sorry. But in the ESG really is about financial impacts only on the company. So workers, shortage of workers, right? So labor shortages, looking at supply chain, which we saw post-pandemic, and supply chain disruptions, things of that nature, weather, severe weather scenarios like we're having right now in hurricane season in the Western Hemisphere. So financial impacts, and I put in single materiality, I do not have time to talk about that, but really it's the impacts only, the financial impacts on a company. ESG was developed by investors for investors. They just want to know if they're going to make a good bet. How good is the risk to actually own a company and shares in ownership of stock in a company? And it's all based on risks and opportunities. So that's what ESG is. And to kind of break it down, environmental is what we talked about in the whole grand scheme of sustainability. But sustainability is external to the company as well as internal, which is only what ESG is about. So greenhouse gas emissions, water scarcity, I'm looking at biodiversity, circularity and waste, energy use, deforestation. These are all environmental impacts that are part of the environmental side of the ESG that the investors look at. On the social side, equity, inclusion, diversity, safety and health at work, and then child and forced labor. And looking at business relationships, as I had indicated earlier. So decision-making and accountability, tends to be, the social side and the governance tend to not be the areas that most companies have focused on in the past, but this is what the future is going to bring. So it's decision-making, we keep coming back to this, and accountability. And what are the ethical business practices? So codes of conduct, data privacy, supply chain management, expectations. And also this whole idea of accurate and transparent accounting. So you can see this accounting of profit and loss all comes together, and how is the audit process involved in that? And then looking at balanced and strategic boards, business continuity and resilience. So these are all parts of governance. Again, if you don't walk away with anything today, these are very important because these are the conversations you can have with your organization. So when I say to you, and if I go back, if I say to you, health and safety is here, health and safety is here on the sustainability and ESG side, I would say to you that we no longer have to just ask for a seat at the table. And this is a seat at the table in your boardroom, in your operational rooms, in your C-suite areas. We are the table. We are foundational. Health and safety is integral. It's foundational to sustainability and ESG. So having said that, I'm hoping everybody is right here with me because let's talk about some influences and get back to some value. So the value of people, the terminology I want you to be familiar with is human capital. And human capital, it just means wealth, right? It's the financial aspect that people bring, their contribution brings to a company. And so these are your people, workers, talent. Human capital can also be interns, right? They can be volunteers. They are an asset. They create value, resources, and capability for your company. And I guess I would share with you if you had a manufacturing operation and you have robots, right, that are actually doing much of the manufacturing, those robots would be considered an asset on the balance sheet, on the profit and loss statement, right? And I would say to you or ask you, a person that those robots are replacing, that person, that human capital, that they're typically not considered an asset. They're on the profit and loss, the balance sheet. They're typically considered a cost. And so what we want to do today is change that conversation and really talk about the value as an asset, that people are an asset to the organization. So we can say that in terms of contribution, but what the heck does that really mean? So Accenture every year does a CEO survey, and this past year, and the latest survey they did, the CEOs were polled, and for the future, they said there's a lack of skills for people in their organization, and that's going to have a high to medium impact on their business, 73%. So you start to see the people side of sustainability and how important it is. The conference board, and it typically different countries. So Canada will have a conference board, US has a conference board, Europe has a conference board, but they do a C-suite outlook survey, which is global, and they basically are looking at the CEOs and the chief, so the chief human resource officers, and they want to know what are their concerns, and their top number one focus for this year is attracting and retaining talent. Talent is your people, your workers, your associates, your teammates, your human capital. So number one, internal focus for these companies. And I want to just share really quickly that just to kind of give you a sense of value and monetizing. There's a CEO who was interviewed for the book that we wrote. And in that interview, he shared that he brought together to talk about retention and what kind of value does retention of their employees mean. And he brought all of the interdepartmental teams, the heads of department together. And he's like, okay, so can we just put our heads together and figure this out? So the chief human resource officer immediately raised her hand and said, well, let me just say, and this is financial services, for an entry-level person in our organization, an admin person, it will cost us about $6,000 to bring that person in the door and onboard them. So all of a sudden, this chief sustainability officer said, oh, okay, I get it. And he had the opportunity then to monetize and put that on the bottom of the balance sheet to be able to talk about retention and retention rates and why it's important to take care of their people. So this includes their safety, health, and well-being. And as many of us have heard of concepts of presenteeism, absenteeism, quiet quitting, and well-being or job fulfillment, this retention is very important. And it can be a reputational risk or it can be a business risk. And organizations now are understanding that they can turn this into a competitive competitive advantage. There are lists out there, so you can be the top company to work for in the world. But this idea of people and looking at the value of people is really, really taking a turn. So let's think about their health, safety, and well-being. And unfortunately, I'm not going to have enough time to go through everything I'd like to do today because I just don't have enough time. But I just want to make sure that we all understand stakeholders. So when we talk about the stakeholders and the influencers, these are those investors. They're your customers, your suppliers. They're the insurers who are also looking at how well you're taking care of your people. Government regulators, policymakers, the United Nations Global Compact. Many of your companies have signed up to that compact, and part of that are 10 principles. And part of those principles are making sure that they're aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals, which number 8 says decent work. And decent work means people working in environments where they're safe, healthy, and have a sense of well-being. And those stakeholders, they're looking for a level of assurance that the impacts and the opportunities and risks are identified, assessed, measured, and managed. And all of you folks out there that do management systems, your risk-based approach to managing safety and health, this is very familiar because these stakeholders want transparency. They want to understand whether it's publicly or privately disclosed because they want accountability, comparability, and assurance to inform integrated business decision making. And at the end of the day, that's what this is about. So investors, as I've said, are interested in human capital, and all of this is really market driven. So let's connect a few more dots. And Scott, I think we're doing good, aren't we? Time-wise?
Yeah.
All
Yeah,
right.
you're all right.
Perfect. Thank you. Just checking in. So one of the things Tanis and I did in our book was to create some sort of framework. And this framework you'll be very familiar with because it's all based on the Plan, Do, Check, Act model, right? So understanding how to identify, assess, how to look at making sure controls you put in place, right, are actually working. And if not, then you put in corrective actions. So this whole construct of sustainability, and if anyone out there is familiar with ISO 45001 or Z1000 in Canada or Z10 in the United States, this management concept, this risk-based approach to managing safety and health, you got to look at the context of your organization. And so in this framework, we've talked about what is the sustainability culture change framework. So you got to look at, what are your business leaders thinking about in terms of sustainability and the safety and health of their people. And then there's a decision-making roadmap, which is getting you from current state to future state that the company wants to be relative to health and safety, relative to sustainability. And then there's a whole bunch of sustainability assessment tools that we've provided. And one of them is a maturity assessment. And then really kind of understanding this integrated risk management process, understanding risks and opportunities, and decision-making around who you're going to report to and what you're going to report. So this integrated sustainability business model really will help an organization understand how, first of all, where do they need to start and how to actually manage sustainability, focusing on their customers and what their needs and expectation are, their stakeholders, and then moving forward on a maturity curve. So thinking about True North, and Malk had kind of alluded to this morning. So this idea of True North is, what is the purpose of the company? And how does the company create value? So I would like to introduce this concept of True North and the True North test. And what this means is, in terms of purpose and value creation for an organization, is that it's where the impact and dependency on people, we talked about earlier in the construct of sustainability, and their health, their safety, and their well-being, including the environment and natural resources, they're actually valued. So remember, we talked about P&L, we talked about balance sheet, and we talked about decision-making, because you can't always monetize everything. And that value is reflected in all business decision-making. And that is a measure of true corporate performance. So this is that construct of true north, that is directionally where companies need to be thinking about going and embracing this purpose, because it does create value for the organization, profitability, and it drives through when it's aligned with the purpose, with the culture, with the strategy, how things are executed, the decisions that are made for executing on strategy, by reducing risk, as well as understanding the capability and the capacity of the organization. So this purpose, this true north, will drive your integrated policies, your processes, your programs and procedures. It impacts the risk reduction strategy. So looking at the impacts, looking at the risks and opportunities from sustainability, from human capital, from environmental, from health, from safety, and those aspects of your organization internally, as well as in your supply chain. And all of this is supported by a culture that is in support of sustainability, human capital, occupational health and safety, and EH&S. And you can't do this without engaged, empowered, and capable people, your workforce, right? Because they are at the core of every thriving business, and they are the decision makers at all levels of the organization. And the output of this is operational, commercial, sustainability, safety and health, as well as environmental health and safety excellence. So this is kind of like the big picture on strategically how this can work in an organization, no matter the size, small, medium size, a large multinational company, and 140 operations throughout the world. So the idea here is this is the true north test. If this is working, then everything is heading towards that concept of value and true north. And using this integrated sustainability model and and moving forward, the idea is to figure out what the heck is your current state. So I would just put to you, when you think about what is your company's current state of sustainability maturity, you can either be in reactive mode, right? No concept of what ESG or sustainability is until you have a regulator, or you might have the Department of Defense who is requiring you to report into, not requiring, but suggesting that would be in your best interest if you want future bids, to report into the CDP, Carbon Disclosure Project, which measures and gives you a score, your company a score, on their greenhouse gas emissions, carbon footprint, on water use, on biodiversity, on deforestation, if they're applicable. So until that happens, you're really in reactive mode. The company really has no systems or processes in place. There's no public disclosure or reporting, and no real recognition and no real leadership commitment to sustainability or ESG. Then you move to compliance mode, and compliance is basically a stakeholder, which could be a government regulatory agency, depending on where you are in the world. Canada is much more mature in the sustainability and ESG area, and it's when they're being asked then from a compliance perspective with regulations, the company assures compliance. But again, only public disclosure or reporting as required. And then the next level is managed. So sustainable ESG is recognized. The company is proactively identifying, assessing, and managing those impacts and dependencies we've talked about. And they're looking at the risks associated with that and the opportunities. But there's no integrated clarity, if you will, a very siloed approach. And so no opportunities for integration. So your procurement area is actually talking to your operations folks, is talking to your human resources, to your environmental health and safety folks, to the accounting and finance people, to investor relations. There's no real organizational interconnectivity. And there can be some public disclosure depending on the department that's operating it. And then the highest level, that construct that's really pointing to true north, is an integrated approach. So an opportunity to proactively look into the future to not just manage compliance, but to actually look at the ability to create value for the company and for all stakeholders throughout the organization, internally and externally. And there is proactive public disclosure, because it's a competitive advantage. You're going to get that bid versus your competitor in a scenario of reporting. So thinking about this, and I'm not going to do the poll because I think I'm going to run out of time, but I want you to be thinking and drop in the chat. And Scott, if you see anything I should be aware of in that chat, please let me know. But anyone have any of your companies that are actually in the reactive mode versus all the way over in the integrated mode? Do we have any True North companies out there?
Well, the chat has been on fire. Lots of comments and questions and back and forth. So sorry we didn't get you set up earlier and see what people are talking about.
Not to worry.
Yeah.
All right. Has anyone? Do we have any like off the charts True North integrated companies out there? Not yet. That's okay. I would be very impressed if we did. Most companies, I mean, this is a journey, and that's really the point of having this maturity curve. Is companies are going to get on this sustainability ESG journey wherever they are. That's why it's important to understand what your current state is in order to figure out where you want to be. So I'm going to kind of breeze through the last bit of this. What I want to do is just offer some resources to you. Specifically, go, and I'm going to, I haven't really talked to Scott to you about this, but I'm hoping that I can get these slides to the folks, because I've got a lot of resources in here. This being one of them, Natura, which is the Body Shop. It's a Brazilian-based company, but they have done what we're talking about today, really looking at the P&L, the profit and loss, and using and looking at True North and the balance sheet and valuing the people in their organization. So also the National Safety Council has gone through and provided information on how companies can actually value people in their organization. So what I want to share with you is this. This is an impact pathway. And this impact pathway basically looks at changing the math. So it's looking at an intervention, in this case, an ergonomic intervention. And how does it actually change human capital, the people? Well, basically, better equipment, if you've got an ergonomic intervention, also reduces injury and ill health. And then this value and this value creation here is you can actually monetize the value to workers and their families. So increased job satisfaction by the employee, their ability to actually hold their babies, right? Actually go skiing if they want to, having a good quality of life. And to the company, there's a lot of financials, that downtime, turnover, et cetera. And then finally, reducing product damage for the customer. And in this case, can actually reduce shipping times. So they kind of really like your company. So there's a lot to be talking about in terms of financial impacts. And in this research with NSC, Nike, and this is publicly available, they determined, and this was their accounting folks, that the reputational risk of a global supply chain worker safety initiative was going to have a reputational value of $6.5 million US. And that is significant, right? That can be put on a P&L. This Natura, the company I was sharing with you, they determined it was $750,000 on US dollars for the value of the people that are working in their particular organization. That's per year. So there's ways in which to do this. And what I just want to leave you with is about changing this conversation, right? Looking at value, changing the math, and being able to get people in your organization together, i.e. that chief sustainability officer, making sure that that human resource person is there so they can understand the financial $6,000 US for retention of an employee, all with the goal of True North and influencing decision-making. And at the end of the day, this is about people, it's It's about brand integrity and competitive advantage. And remember the economic side of sustainability. So it's people on the social side, it's the environment and natural resources, and it's the economic side and that return on your investment. So in order for business to create a better world, looking at these financial reward systems and breaking that open a bit more in terms of value, it creates value for all stakeholders. And I guess I want to just leave you with the idea of understanding your current state, understanding there's a business model out there for sustainability, and lots of resources out there that I'm going to leave with Scott and Jamie to provide you all with, all of these resources, and leave you with a challenge. Are you future fit? Because this isn't just coming your way, it's here. So with that, I'd like to say thank you.